I am Brian Isaacs with Fanboy Factor. Today I have Vivek Quarry, a Broadway producer. Currently, he is working on Will Eisner's most famous graphic novel, A Contract with God, turning it into a musical. Thank you for joining me, Vivek. I really appreciate it.
It's totally my pleasure. Totally my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's a complicated name, but I should tell you the correct way to say my name is Vivek, if you don't
Oh,
mind.
I apologize.
No, no, no. It's a tricky one. So thank you for having me, though. I'm really pleased to be here.
Now, looking at your bio, so how many years have you been like that as a Broadway producer? I mean,
Yeah, so I had a very small role in the producers, the Mel Brooks, the producers.
right.
That was the show that kind of introduced me to the world of producing. You won't find my name anywhere on it, but I was there behind the scenes. I did raise a little money for it, but most importantly, I was able to kind of look and learn how a show is produced from that show. So that was, forget the exact date on it, but was, well over 2 decades ago.
Yeah.
So this has been, I describe my work as being platform nimble, is the sort of dorky phrase that I use. For me, all our projects revolve around music first, story is a very close second, and then we
Right.
kind of figure out, is it a Broadway show? Is it a film? Is it a TV series? Is it a graphic novel? What the medium sort of I think comes last. That doesn't mean late; it just means
You're right.
last. Um, but there's no question that I'm best known for my Broadway work. And so yeah, it's been over 2 decades, I guess, that I've been
Wow.
been doing things on Broadway. Yeah,
Now, your latest that you're working on is Will Eisner's Contract with God, which is, seen as the one he coined the phrase a graphic novel.
yeah,
Technically, it's debatable whether he actually created the first graphic novel,
yeah,
but a lot of people consider that, and it's probably one of his best works as it kind of got him away from comic strip storytelling into more storytelling about his own life. Um,
sure.
I mean, I myself, as you can see, huge
Yeah, I
Eisner
love you're rocking
fan.
the spirit shirt. I love
Yeah.
it.
Um, I mean, what prompted you to current? I know they were trying to do something with uh, Contract with God for many years now, and I kept reading, it was going to start, then stop, start, stop. How did why a musical version? I guess is my question.
Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of reasons for that. Like at heart, as I mentioned a few moments ago, like I'm a music kid first. Like I
Right,
adore music, and I always think in terms of music. Like whenever I think about what I'm doing for my projects, I always think, can something be a musical? I guess that's always a question that I am asking myself. So I'll start by saying that I a contract with God is very near and dear to my heart. I am not Jewish, but I'm a child of immigrants, and
right,
I was born in New York City. And I think that we can have a longer conversation, but my background about this, but my background is my religious background is as a Hindu, and I think there's
right.
actually a lot of similarities between the Hindu culture and the Jewish culture, good and bad. I think many of the things I admire and the things I have problems with in Hinduism are very similar to my feelings about Judaism. But I'm not Jewish, but I do very much relate to the immigrant experience,
Right.
and I very much relate to the New York City experience. Growing up in New York City, my parents' dreams for me were to become a doctor or an engineer. Because that's what Indian kids who have some opportunity did in the 1970s.
Right.
And that wasn't my dream. I dreamed of the American dream. I wanted to work in entertainment and write comic books and produce musicals, and so I found a lot very relatable and moving in A Contract with God.
Right.
I've read it probably literally hundreds of times. It's a book that I keep coming back to, and so much about it. The subject matter is beautiful. The way he tells those stories. I mean, I think every page is a masterclass
Yeah,
in sequential art storytelling. You know, and
definitely.
that's another conversation. But I guess where I'm heading with all this is it's a book that I kept coming back to over the years as a fan, as somebody who just loves the work and
Right.
feels like every few years rereading it, I got something new out of it. I learned
Yeah.
more about myself. I learned more about my city. I learned more about how you creatively tell a story. Like those were the reasons that I kept coming back to a contract with God. You know, I met the folks in the Eisner estate
Hmm.
several years ago. It might have been around about when, and I'm just saying this to state a fact, not to sound arrogant, but I won the Eisner Award for the
Right.
Fifth Beatle.
Fifth Beatle. Yep.
You know that year that it came out, and I'm pretty sure it was in the wake of winning the Eisner or at the Eisner ceremony that I met the Eisner estate, and I became friendly with them, and it was such an honor for me to win an award, especially one connected to one of my heroes. And you know, I know I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I know they've been very protective of the legacy
Right.
of Will, and in particular about this piece, about
Yeah.
this masterwork. You know, they're very people have a lot of mixed feelings about what happened with the spirit. So let's not go there. And let's not get into the Spirit film. But let's
Yeah.
just say that in the wake of the Spirit film, I think sensitivities were even more towards let's be careful with how we adapt this work. And I never even threw myself in that ring. You know, I sort of stood on the in the background as a fan, thinking, you know, I hope if it ever gets adapted, it'll be done right. You know,
Right.
and I guess I'm at a place in my life where, you know, I'm turning 50 next year. I'm sort of looking back at what I've done. I'm looking back at what I have left to do with my life. I think a lot about legacy, about my own legacy. I have two kids. My children are the first children in three generations of my family who don't have immigrant parents. You know, my parents were immigrants
Right.
from Guyana. Their parents were immigrants from India, and I think a lot about that, about what legacy am I leaving behind my kids. I think a lot about this city that I've grown up in, and I think about what I want to do. And, you know, I guess patting myself on the back a little bit, I've also reached a level of success where I can pick projects of a certain stature. And it occurred to me with all of this that's going on in my life, or what, you know, I came back to a contract with God, and I knew the estate, and I knew they felt comfortable with me, and I knew they liked me and trusted me. So all of a sudden I thought, given every all of what I've just said, I'm at a place in my life where, hey, if there's a musical to be done here, I should be the one to do it, you know? And I do believe there is a musical to be done here. The work, as I said, I always think in terms of music, and to me, this book sings. And clearly there's the street singer, so
Right.
that's an obvious one. But
Yeah.
I feel like all those other stories felt musical to me if they were
I
put
can
in
see
the
that.
right hands. You know, I feel that
Yes.
those stories sing. And I say that poetically, but I mean it literally, because to me, if it's literally going to work, it needs to start with the poetry. Do these work sing to you in a poetic way? And if they do, then why couldn't you find a great composer to actually make them sing? And I feel like in some ways that's what I do as a musical theater producer, you know?
Right.
And so when I first thought that, you know, my next thought is what could music add to this story? And those of you who are listening to this interview who know the book know that, and you'll appreciate this certainly, Brian. Like the book is a little heavy. I mean,
Yeah.
it deals with a lot of very heavy themes.
Yeah.
There are moments of humor in it, but it's not really. It's a pretty tough read in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. I
pretty
mean,
dark in a lot of ways.
yeah. I mean, the main story does end on kind of a down note. Uh,
Yeah,
it's not the most happy thing that happens, and
totally. And you know
it's
there's a there's a phrase in screenwriting called dog and truck, where like if you very much want to pull at somebody's heartstrings, put a dog in peril, and there's a dog that gets murdered, that gets killed in one of the stories.
Yes.
There's a lot of misogyny and there's violence against women. There's some really tough elements in this story, right? And so, and yet I have gone back to this book over and over again, and I've never read it once where at the end I walked away feeling depressed or sad. It
Right.
doesn't have a happy ending, but I think it
Right.
has a hopeful ending. I've
Yeah.
always come out of that book feeling hopeful, feeling like I'm not alone, like there are other people that understand the value of my dreams and how hard it is to chase a dream. And so, how do I do that? How do I take heavy source material and present it in a way that leans into the hope and the levity? And I think one of the easy answers for that is music. I think the
Makes
minute
sense.
you add music to anything, it adds a degree of hope. And I think the minute you say a contract with God musical, look, your first thought might be like, oh my God, that sounds awful. I hope they don't screw it up. I hope it doesn't have awful jazz hands. And I get that instinct. But I think immediately you think and that's almost an extreme example of what I'm trying to say. You
Right.
immediately realize there's going to be some levity to that. And then when you look at the people who are doing it, Lisa Loeb, Jill Sabule, Modest Yahoo, Sam Hollander, if you know their work and you know how much they care about the Jewish heritage, you can immediately get, oh, they're going to find the humor and the levity and the hope in what might otherwise be a very dark, rainy, drab, depressing story, So I know that was a super long answer to your question, but it was all of those reasons why I care about the book, why I think the book sings, and why I think it should be a musical. I actually think doing it as a musical might be the only way to do it, might be the only way to actually get at that hopeful ending without creating something that just feels dark and depressing, which is
Right.
not the source material. The source material is so much more than that. So as I started to formulate these thoughts, it occurred to me that maybe a musical is the only way to do justice by adapting this work. So here we are.
So I got to ask you, how did you get introduced to Will Eisner? What was your
Oh my
gateway to
gosh.
him?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I feel I have been reading comics and a lover of comics my entire life.
Right.
I say this often, but I'm pretty sure I learned to read by reading comics. My
Same.
earliest
Same
memories of
here.
reading are reading Tintin books with my mom. And she came from a European background, so I know him as Tonton. But reading Tonton with my mom, and so I guess for me, if you love comics and you grew up reading comics, everything from superhero work to Tauntaun to the Sandman to the great works of Frank Miller and all, if you love it all, then Will Eisner was kind of always there. It's a really
Right.
good question. How did I get introduced to Will Eisner? But it's kind of like that's almost like saying, how did you learn to read? It's like if you love comics and you really love the medium of comics, then Will's probably always been there.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't even know it, but I knew it. So yeah, I mean, as long as I can remember, I've known that work. I mean, that's why I'm unable to answer the question. I just as long as I can remember, I've known the work of Will Eisner as an immigrant, as a New York City kid, or a child of immigrants, I should say, as a child of immigrants, a New York City kid, and a lover of comic books. Like, how could Will Eisner not have been in my life since for as long as I can remember?
I mean, I've interviewed a lot of modern, comic personalities, and to this day, a lot of the young guys are still, up. When you ask them their influences, you got the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Will Eisner is right there. Like, they kind of like that holy,
Totally,
trinity. But he's
totally.
what I love about the idea about this music. It's going to bring his work more to the foreground than a lot of people are not aware of. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm like I said, I'm very much into Will Eisner. I work with every year the foundation. They do a Will Eisner
yeah,
week,
right
and
on.
I participate heavily in that and try and educate people about Will Eisner, contract with God. I find I love Contract with God, but I really find The Dreamer just kind of an insight because I like to know how they came up with all these comics and stuff, and just Eisner's own account of the golden age of comics is really great. And it's, I mean, like you said, the people at the foundation are really great.
They are, yeah.
I'm very close with. I work closely pretty much every year with Danny Fingerworth,
Yeah, yeah.
and really nice guy, and it's just like I can reach out to him when I have questions and stuff, and he hooks me up with the necessary materials. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean this in so many ways, there's so many of my dreams coming true in this one project. Um, and it is one of these things where if you know who Will Eisner is, like you and I do, many people are like, "Oh my gosh, it's the holy grail of all adaptations. It's the greatest graphic novel ever written. It's the first
yeah,
graphic novel ever written." But there are a lot of people who have no idea who Will Eisner is. It's a really remarkable thing, and
right.
what I'm hoping to do is tip that balance. And I don't think it takes much, but I really really am hoping to do right by folks like you and I who just love Will's work so deeply. That is very important to me to make sure that we honor that legacy.
Right.
And again, I don't want to put words in the estate's mouth, but I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have given me the rights if they didn't think that I was going to do that. Um, and then the second mission is to introduce people to his work. I love it when people say to me, "God, thank you for. I had no idea this existed. How did I not know this existed?" Okay, well, now. So that is definitely one of my missions here.
So I mean, what now is the process behind all of it? Obviously, you have your source material. So where do you go from there now?
Yeah, so I develop my shows in very unusual ways. You may have noticed if you've been following me on social media that we've actually been doing recording sessions, and we still don't have our book writer. This is very unusual. Normally, you get your and for those of you who don't know, a book is the theater lingo for script. So the script of a musical is called the book, and we don't have our book writer. And normally that's what you do first. You get your book writer, and
Right.
then you get your composer, or you do the two things in tandem. And the book writer and the composer then start writing the musical. Then you bring on board a director. Then you start rounding out cast and production designer and video designer and costume designer and all those persons. Then you cast, then you do a workshop, you get everyone in a room, see what you've got, and there are various variations of that
Right.
process, but that kind of is the process. But for me, I brought all the composers on board first, and I got them in a recording studio to start writing songs, and we've recorded demos for 2 songs. That's
Nice.
and we don't have a book writer. Like most of my colleagues will scratch their heads and be like, "How do you do that? Like that's crazy. That doesn't. Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense." Um, but for me, I'm music first, and in this case, obviously a book writer, and we are talking to book writers right now, so we hope to have one on board very soon. And a book writer has their work cut out for them. Like, how do you adapt this material? Do you tell 4 separate stories? Do you tell one story and interweave the 4 stories? Do you jump back and forth in time? There's lots of issues that need to be figured out.
Right.
So certainly there is a lot of story work to be done, but you also kind of have the basics. You know that there will be the contract with God story. There will be a street singer. We will tell the super story. There will be people who will be going to Kokalin, and that story will happen. So, it's not, I think, as preposterous to say, let's write a song that's tied to one of those stories, that's tied to a moment in those stories that's
Right.
very likely to happen, like very unlikely that we're not going to have this moment in our final piece. You could pick 10 moments that you're pretty sure, no matter what a book writer does with it, you're going to have that moment in it. So we started thinking about that. Like, what are some key moments, some key themes, some key characters, some key emotions that are very likely to make it into the final piece? And of course, I can't give away too much right now, but
Right.
we honed in on 2, and we spent 3 days working very intensely. And we, as Sam Hollander, Jill Sabule and Ryan Miller from Guster were all in a studio. Lisa Loeb joined us by Zoom, so she was in the studio for most of it. Modest Yahoo is on tour right now, so he couldn't be there during the studio sessions, but there are various, he, for those of you who don't know his work, he does a lot of work in sort of the reggae and rap genres. And so even his influence on the songs will be like, let's bring him in for a rap break or a reggae moment, as opposed to necessarily writing the whole song. So not having him there for the entire session was not ideal. We would have preferred to have me there, but
Right.
it's okay, so to speak, in the sense that we'll work out the songs and he's on tour and we're staying in touch with him as we can. And we might say, here's what we've got. Where do you think your piece could appear? So actually the structure from a musical and from a music making, songwriting, music recording standpoint made a lot of sense.
Right.
And because I think the idea of a contract with God musical might strike some as being odd, like I wanted to do a few songs so that I have these under my belt so I can show a book writer and I could show other people. And who knows, maybe we'll let the public and some fans hear a bit as well. Not sure how we're going to do that yet, but I like internally to be able to say, like, here are some demos. Now you literally can hear what I think and why I think this sings and what our composers are doing. So it's very unusual that we started the process there, but that's what
Hmm.
we did. And so right now there are two things happening. Sam Hollander, who's our core producer, is finishing those demos.
Okay.
And meanwhile, I am out to book writers. So we're talking to book writers. We hope to have one of those secured soon. And then after that, the book writer will start cracking the structure of the piece, start cracking the story, and start building on what the songwriters have already begun working on. And then once that happens, at some point we'll have a full draft with songs in place, and then we'll start doing the more traditional theater process that I described earlier. Then we'll start looking for a director. Then we'll start thinking about workshops, and then we'll start thinking about regional theaters and how do we actually want to build it out. But right now it's music first, story a very close second. As I said earlier, that's how I approach my projects.
I gotta ask, when you do, create a musical, is there like a, do you have like a time, a length of it you're trying to hit? Because I took script writing in college for film, and they always told us, you need to do 100, 120 minutes as a minimum. So I was just wondering if there are any like kind of guidelines with that when it comes to musical theater.
It's one of the things that I find very exciting about where Broadway is going is that, any guidelines that may have existed on in the past for that kind of stuff is really not relevant anymore.
Right.
I produced American Idiot, and American Idiot what there was no intermission, and it was less than an hour and a half long. So like we used to joke that our audience on Broadway had seen their show, was done with their show, and was out on the street going about their night, while the Phantom of the Opera audience was in the street having their cigarettes during intermission. Like, like they were halfway through and our audience was done. And Phantom is great. I love Phantom. I just took my kids to see Phantom, so that's not a diss on Phantom. It's an example of two very different types of shows. You
Right.
know, so you can have a piece that literally runs for less than an hour and a half for 80 minutes with no intermission, or you could have a more traditional musical, which is about 2 to 2.5 hours long with an intermission. Jagged Little Pill, which I also produced, fit that more traditional mold in terms of time length. It was
Right.
untraditional in a lot of other ways, but in terms of time length, we were about 2.5. We're on the road right now. We are about 2.5 hours long with one intermission. So you can see, everything.
Right.
So as relates to what I'm doing with a contract with God, there are no marching orders there. I am not
Okay.
telling a writer this has to be 2.5 hours long. This has to be less than an hour and a half. This has to, it's as long as it needs to be.
Okay.
And that's really the answer to that question. And what's heartening is you're seeing many examples of that on Broadway.
Yeah.
So that you're seeing both like very short musicals and very long musicals.
Same with the film industry as well. You're starting to see like more people able to tell their story, and It's
Sure.
kind of, I know people complain about the time, but I'm like, that's how long it needs to take sometimes to tell this story.
Yeah, I mean, I think if something is well crafted, hopefully that you're not noticing the time that's passing, or you're noticing it with joy, you know. But that's the trick of the creators. The creators need to make sure that there's enough exciting material for 2.5 hours, or for an 8-part miniseries, or for a 2-hour film, or whatever the medium is.
Right.
The creatives need to have that in mind. Like, is the audience going to want to spend that much time with us? You know, so
It really sounds like a really, exciting project. When I
thank
read
you.
about it, I got, it is one of my favorite books. It's, like you, huge Will Eisner fan, and it just, it's nice to see it's finally being adapted and
Thank
in
you.
some type of medium. And
Thank you.
yeah, it's, I know a lot of, some of my contemporaries questioned about the musical, and I'm like, you really haven't seen too many musicals, have you?
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, people who aren't into musical theater may not
Yeah,
realize how diverse the genre of musical theater is. You can find all kinds of music styles in musical theater. You know,
it's the same way with comics too. It's just like everybody still,
that's exactly
thinks of
right.
guys in spandex, and it's broadened out that there's something for everybody there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, perhaps unsurprisingly, my musician and composer friends don't think the idea of a Contract with God musical is weird at all, you know, because they understand music in a very deep way, and they can
Right.
imagine what type of music could be put to that in a way that would honor it and not make it cheesy or disrespectful. And that is
Very
very
cool.
much our mission, believe me.
So I guess my last question, any, yeah, you looking at any type of ETA for this, or
It can take years to get a Broadway musical off the ground. That
okay.
that being said, we are really moving at light speed. As I mentioned earlier, it's very bizarre to have had a musical that we've only announced a handful of months ago, and we are already recording, songs. So I am hoping that we will continue to move at light speed, and maybe in the next couple of years there will be something to share with the public. Now, exactly what that is, I'm not sure. Will that be a workshop? Will it be a regional production? Will it be some music? But I definitely hope that the public, the fans, etc., will be able to experience something from our Contract with God musical, if not the full musical itself, within the next 2 to 3 years. But I readily, for those of you who are listening who know musical theater development, I readily acknowledge that's light speed for a musical. My producing colleagues will be like, "That's a joke. There's no way," but I think there is, given how we are approaching this. So,
I got to say, after speaking with you, I really feel it's in good hands now.
thank you,
Yeah, I really think you're going to do it justice, and I can't wait to see it.
thank you,
Uh,
Brian. That means the world. Coming from somebody like you that knows Will's work and this work intimately, that is the highest praise I could hope for. So, thank you.
and thank you for taking the time to speak with me. Can't wait to see like what else comes of it, because when saw your tweet today about Lisa Loeb, and I was just like, whoa. So that I can't wait to see what else is coming out. So
Thank you.
thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much. Let's stay in touch. There's going to be a lot of, as I said, it takes a long time to get these things off the ground. So there'll be lots of milestones and hurdles crossed. And I'd love to keep you posted
Definitely.
so that the fans know. As I said, I'm a fan first. So I want to make sure the fans are aware and excited and approve of what we're doing. That's really important to me.
Thank you so much again.
My pleasure. Thank you.